Good morning, dear friends and colleagues. I once again have the honor to warmly welcome you to the ICES Annual Science Conference. And I want to start by extending a very special thanks to our Swedish hosts for having us. I want to thank the Minister for taking the time to come here and welcome us, Jennie Nilsson, Minister for Rural Affairs. I want to extend a special thanks to the Swedish delegates, Karin Victorin and Jakob Hagberg, to the SWAM Director General, Jakob Granit, and also to the conference coordinator, Maria Zetterquist. At the heart of the ICES work is the link between sea and society. Our platform provides a dynamic link between science development and the responsive and relevant advice which is needed as part of the impartial evidence base for decision makers, all of which is very nicely reflected in the themes that are addressed during the sessions this week. Our annual event is always an important activity for us, but this year it provides a special opportunity for us to consider our role, the role of science in contributing to the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and specifically the Sustainable Development Goal on ocean health and life below water. And as we all know, this goal is also aligned and interconnected with other goals on alleviating hunger, gender equality, climate change, and actions on the sustainable and efficient use of natural resources, just to mention some. We can also look forward to drawing inspiration from our keynote speakers, Manuel Barange, Greta Peckel, and Cisco Werner, who will reflect on different aspects of societal interactions with the marine environment. As I'm sure you all know, in support of the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN has adopted the Decade of Ocean Science, recognizing that science is needed in order to achieve the 2030 Agenda. And we are very lucky today because we have with us the Secretary General or Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, Vladimir Ryabinin, who is one of the driving forces behind the decade and who will give us an introduction to the decade. ICES is very keen to contribute and to engage to the decade, and specifically to the regional workshop in the North Atlantic that will be arranged by Canada in Halifax in the beginning of 2020. And of course, we will need to work together as a community to bring life and impact to the societal outcomes, which is defined by the decade. So this week, I really encourage you to use the opportunities that are provided by the science sessions, by the poster sessions, network sessions, the conference dinner. Don't forget to buy your ticket. And also the excursions to meet new and old colleagues, because it is this community interaction which is making this event so special. And as always, you will, in this little booklet, find all the information that you need to know. And I take it that you have also all downloaded the Google Calendar, where you can get an overview of all the events that are taking place this week. So I now want to give the floor to the ICES President, Fritz Köster, who will also give you a welcome.
Thank you, Anne-Christine. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, also a warm welcome from my side to the conference, and a big thanks to Sweden as the host country, especially Jennie Nilsson, Minister for Rural Affairs, for opening it. Every human generation perceives the world in rapid change. Some generations more, if one is going to age, some age groups less. I'm belonging to the latter one. We call them in fisheries science the plus group, having a little bit the tendency of recognizing or perceiving that history is actually repeating itself and development is slower than one actually thinks. But even when belonging to that group, I must admit, if I'm looking to the present development, then I am actually convinced that we are in a phase of rapid change. And that is both in the Earth system, in our oceans and seas. It is in science, technology is developing, but we face also political and societal developments. To address these changes require an increasingly integrated and interdisciplinary approach, considering as well human activities as major drivers of change, addressing explicitly societal needs, and that includes requirements for information, evidence, understanding, but also inclusion of society in science. ICES is an international organization spanning the entire North Atlantic and its adjacent seas, from the US and Canada on one side to the Russian Federation on the other side, from the Arctic around Svalbard and Greenland down to the Azores. ICES has proven to be an effective institution fostering and coordinating marine science and delivering impartial and transparent evidence to its member states and international organizations. And I think it is important to recognize that this will continue, especially after a Brexit. Having said that, then there's also a second line, and I think we could already hear that in our General Secretary's introduction. An increasingly globalized world, there is a role for ICES to play, driven by the need for enhanced cooperation in marine science, and that is exemplified by the UN Decade of the Oceans, addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, but also, for example, the agreement to prevent unregulated high sea fisheries in the Central Arctic Ocean. ICES was granted observer status to the UN General Assembly in 2018, and we aim to use this formal status to work with other existing, for example, ICES partners, but also new partners, contributing actively to the global ocean and global food security agenda. When talking about ICES, then I'm actually talking about you, hopefully also with you, because ICES is the community of the scientists which are driving it. It is your engagement which will deliver, hopefully, into these initiatives. And I'm looking forward to work with you in the next 3 years as president of the organization. Increasing broadness in our science and more global engagement, that is also visible in our strategy, our new strategy we launched in the beginning of 2019 and the underlying science plan. It will also impact on the advisory plan, which we will discuss during the conference. The conference program reflects this broadness and these developments as well. It addresses various time and spatial scales of change, different disciplinaries. It's focusing on inter and multidisciplinary approaches. It invites to different forms of interactions, and I think I really like the concept. In short, I can see only one major obstacle, and that is one has to decide where one wants to be and to engage. Wish you all an interesting and interacting and joyful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Fritz, for pointing out all the challenges that we are facing, how we are affected by global events, but also how we are going to contribute to some of these, and how this is all encapsulated also in our ICES strategic plan. I now want to welcome the Swedish Minister, Jennie Nilsson, from Rural Affairs, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much. On behalf of the Swedish government, I am very happy to welcome you all to Sweden and to the city of Gothenburg, which is hosting this year's ICES annual science conference. I hope you will find Gothenburg an interesting location for discussing and sharing the latest knowledge within marine scientists. The annual science conference is an important tradition within ICES that dates from the very beginning when ICES was founded in 1902. The conference gathers the scientific communities to discuss marine science and how it can contribute to the sustainable management of our seas and oceans. Our marine ecosystems are fascinating places that few people have seen in real life. This is perhaps one of the reasons why the oceans have often been neglected and taken for granted. But our oceans provide oxygen, food, and quality of life for billions of people. Because it's hard for us to see the ecosystem of our seas and oceans, we are dependent on marine science to understand what's happened beneath the surface. We are gradually gaining a better understanding of marine ecosystems and our role in protecting and managing them. We have become more aware of how sensitive these environments are and of the challenges that we face in taking better care of them. ICES has a long scientific tradition that dates back about 130 years. The so-called herring booms on the Swedish west coast triggered the curiosity of some Swedish scientists in 1890. The scientists understood the need for regular service of much larger sea areas to understand what affected the abundance and distributions of herring. They realized that international cooperation was needed to study our oceans, which eventually led to the foundation of ICES as an organization. Since then, we have learned a lot more, not only about herring, but about marine life in general. As a minister responsible for fisheries, I cannot overstate the importance of ICES for the sustainable use of our seas and oceans. I am very proud that Sweden is a member state of ICES. ICES coordinates a network of marine scientists and international efforts to collect data and undertake surveys of marine ecosystems. ICES provides impartial evidence and advice every year for an enormous number of fish stocks. Advice from ICES is the most important basis for the fisheries management in Europe and the North Sea Atlantic. Ministers do not always agree on how to follow advices from ICES. However, ICES advice provides the basis for many political decisions and has contributed to a more sustainable management of our fish stocks. Many human activities apart from fisheries affects the marine environment. Therefore, I'm very happy that ICES is preparing to deliver advice on other activities affecting our oceans. The well-being of entire marine ecosystems is essential, not only for fish production, but also for many ecosystem services. Science is crucial for increasing our awareness of the complexity of marine environments. Science is also crucial for enabling evidence-based political decisions. As we become more aware of the challenges ahead for the sustainable use of our seas and oceans, there will be more pressure on decision makers and civil society. There will be more demand for ICES advice. I personally think this is very positive, and I believe that ICES could deliver this, and I believe that if ICES could deliver the same evidence-based and impartial advice for the entire marine ecosystem, we will all benefit. To do this, we need more marine scientists, which is why I'm very glad to see so many participants here today. I would also like to thank ICES for enabling this annual science conference. I would also like to thank the staffs of the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management here in Gothenburg for their efforts in organizing this year's conference. I hope that you will all enjoy the next few days and wish you an inspiring and fruitful annual science conference. Thank you.
Many thanks for these rewarding and positive words about the role of ICES. We are going to use a whole week in order to increase our understanding of marine ecosystems, and we are definitely going to use that to continue our important role to provide non-biased, quality-assured advice. And yes, we would like to engage also in broader issues in addition to the advice that we are giving on fishing opportunities, and we are already working within this field. So without further ado, we've come to the exciting moment where we will look into the award, the Outstanding Achievement Award, and I'm going to hand over to Carl O'Brien, who is going to lead the way.
Okay, good morning. ICES has a thriving community of scientists, advisors, and technical innovators. And this is our opportunity now, before we start this year's annual science conference, to present the award this year. This year we have one award. It's the Outstanding Achievement Award. This award is for the highest recognition for contributions to ICES. It recognizes sustained outstanding performance in contributing to ICES science. It's someone who has recognized leadership skills amongst their peers, someone who has a continued commitment to helping to advance ICES, both as a dynamic international institution and also enriching its community. We look at, as a committee, we look at achievements in both science, management, policy, and mentoring. And this year, particularly, it's been quite difficult. You as a community have nominated very good candidates, all with different skills, and the committee's job has not been an easy one. But it's my pleasure to announce to you that this year's winner is Anne Bucklin. Anne will come up on stage in a few minutes, but I'd like to say a few words about her background. Some of you will be familiar with her work. Some, like me, until I saw the nomination, didn't know very much about what she did, but I'm impressed in the work that she does and the respect that she's held with by her peers and by her mentors. So, Anne, she's recognized by her peers, many peers, as an outstanding marine scientist in the field of molecular ecology and evolution of zooplankton. She's one of the creators, one of the drivers behind the Census of Marine Zooplankton. This is a global contribution that results in public databases of DNA barcode sequences. And after this presentation, if like me, you were not familiar with some of this work, I would encourage you to go and Google some of this. It's amazing science. Even for me as a stock assessor and advisor, it's amazing science. She focused on the analysis of diet preference and prey selection of mesopelagic salps, which are gelatinous species. I had to look that one up as well. And fishes using metabarcoding to compare diversity of gut contents in surrounding waters. So she's studying food web dynamics in the deep oceans, which is not an easy task. She's been an active member of the ICES community for many years. And her contributions have been mentorship. She's mentored many young scientists over her career. Like a number of us, she's also been a bridge builder between ICES and the academic research community. It's often quite difficult. There's a lot of interesting research that goes on in academia and in universities. Some of that is quite difficult to then translate or transfer into the ICES community or into advice, and she's been one of those who's been instrumental in bridging those gaps and joining up. She's been a presenter at many ASCs, so I'm sure this isn't her first ASC, but I'm not quite sure how many you've been to. She's been a theme session convener. She's been a member of the Zooplankton Ecology Working Group and chair of the Integrated Morphological and Molecular Taxonomy Study Working Groups. I apologize for the acronym WGIMT, but it will become clearer later on in one of the slides why you need to remember that. And also, she's had one of the highest positions in ICES. She's been delegate to the UK Council for the United States. So she's been through science. I think you're still doing science, and you've also sat on the ICES Council as part of its management process. In terms of what colleagues have had to say about her, one colleague said, in my opinion, the most important of Anne's achievements is that the WGIMT work attracted so many contributors from outside of the regular ICES world, as numerous members of the group are from academia, and that's quite an achievement. Knowing Anne's infinite dedication, reaching out to the other researchers around the world, and leading great efforts such as the MetaZoo gene, together with her self-giving nature, I've developed enormous respect towards her. Another said, a particular notable characteristic of Professor Bucklin is her collegiality and inclusiveness of scientists from a wide range of nationalities, as evidenced by the list of co-authors on her papers, which are generally quite extensive. Along the years, she's always cared for young researchers and supported the not-so-young colleagues, making it a pleasure to learn, work, and debate with her. I see her smiling, so clearly this is a message she recognizes. Anne has dedicated her career to advanced science and to train and inspire the young generation. She's committed to excellence with a lifetime of experience and innovation. Another said the breadth and duration of her contribution is truly impressive. In particular, through her enthusiasm and drive, she has contributed significant basic research input to a range of ICES initiatives over a long period. So congratulations, Anne. And I hope as a community you'll now congratulate Anne and she'll come up and receive her award. This is for you.
May I say a few words?
And you can say a few words, yes.
Just a few words.
I'll stand up your way.
Well, thank you so much, and those of you who know me know how astonished I am to be here. But I've benefited so much from ICES. I'm happy for this opportunity to say thank you for the recognition, and thank you for many years of assistance. So I fell in love with genetics in graduate school, and I witnessed the arrival of DNA sequencing, and that's what we took to see for barcoding zooplankton. And then the arrival of the next-gen sequencing, the meta-barcoding we called it, where we could analyze whole samples, millions of DNA sequences. And I can tell you that ICES has been on the forefront of the application of these technologies to fisheries management and ocean ecosystem assessment. And so my participation in ICES has been very much to my benefit, because not only do I get input from colleagues, I have collaborators, working group theme sessions, all the things that Carl mentioned have been wonderful forums for the scientific exchange, but it's also opened a direct avenue towards the applications for fisheries management. And you may know that ICES is on the front lines of using meta-barcoding now for looking at not only pelagic biodiversity, but also fisheries assessment. And many of the managers who are responsible for, and researchers who are responsible for fisheries management in the ICES countries are on the front lines of looking at this new technology. So this has been a wonderful avenue for me to explore both the research and the policy implications. And that is very unusual, really, to have both in one place. I can tell you that we had to look back, and it was 2000 was an ASC, and I was working with Icelandic colleagues, and we were enjoying that international collaboration. And then I became engaged with the working groups, and WIGIMP, yes, I'm not responsible for that acronym. That was Steve Hay, who invented the Working Group for Integrative Morphological Molecular Taxonomy, and in 2009, and I was an early advocate and member of that group, later chair, and the work continues today with new chairs, and it's absolutely at the forefront of looking at how we can apply molecular technologies to basic questions in biodiversity of the ocean as well as fisheries management. And so this has been a wonderful opportunity. And I can also say ICES is my favorite place to bring my lab members, several of whom are in the audience who've been sworn to silence. And because not only does it allow them to see international collaboration, scientific collaboration at work, it allows them to understand why what they do is important. And there's almost no other organization that basically shows you those direct applications into management, assessment, and real-world applications. And that's a wonderful opportunity for young scientists. So I can say thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. I'm deeply grateful for all the wonderful years of engagement with the ICES institution and community. And I'm absolutely astonished by this wonderful award. Thank you very much.
Just before you go, besides the nice glass plinth you have the Outstanding Achievement Award certificate, and we also have a bag of goodies for you, which we hope you'll accept on our behalf.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Also, a big congratulations from my side. And I don't think that we could think of a better ICES ambassador. I mean, stating also about the interlinkages between science, policy management. So, yeah, I look forward to you continuing that role for many more years. Now we are starting on our discussion on the UN Decade of Ocean Science, the science that we need for our management purposes. And I would like here to welcome the Executive Director, Vladimir Ryabinin from the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, to give us an introduction to the UN Decade of the Ocean Science, which will then seamlessly go over to the discussion that we will have in the panel. So, welcome.
Thank you very much, Anne-Christine. Actually, I have a mic. I don't know which of those will be working. If two are working, that will be too much. So, you know, indeed, the decade has been mentioned already several times here. And we hope very much that this wonderful community of scientists will engage in the decade and make it a success. You know, just for the history, I would like not for the history, actually it is a historic moment, but in principle I would like to state we live indeed in the world that is going into climate change, and the last year was the year of the highest carbon emissions in the history of humankind. So despite we have Paris Climate Agreement, the world is getting warmer, and this has implications for the ocean, and ocean has to be also taken into account in all the climate discussions. But this is just an example of the many changes that are happening in the epoch of Anthropocene. And we need to really use the power of science to address the issues. So I remember 2009, the Conference of Parties of United Nations for Environment Convention on Climate Change in Copenhagen, when the science was there was no decision taken. This led to several studies by climate scientists that went even in the domain of psychology to understand why humankind, knowing where we're going, doesn't do anything. So in the result, we have Paris Climate Agreement. But despite we have Paris Climate Agreement, we've had the slide that I have shown to you that carbon emissions are still growing. So the situation in the ocean is similar now to the situation in the climate change domain. And of course, United Nations is at the front of this. The first World Ocean Assessment stated that we are running out of time to start managing the ocean sustainably. Recently, a new ocean narrative was published. The ocean was too big to be ignored. I think it's a wonderful narrative, but it lacks the urgency of the issue. So I think we also need to speak about the new social contract for science. I think this discussion may enrich very much your deliberations in ICES, your engagement, because you have fantastic intellectual activity, fantastic technological advances. So I think we look forward to ICES contributing to sustainability of this world. This will be the oceanographic contract, social contract for science, but also your contract probably. So we were motivated by the fact that the ocean is so important for sustainable development, that ocean sustainability is also a breakthrough, a shortcut to sustainability of the whole world. And we cannot even speak, I think, about achieving many sustainable development goals, particular goal on the climate, goal on food, and many other goals without having science supporting proactively and in a very influential way the development of those sustainable development goals. So that was one motivation for us to speak to United Nations about the ocean we need for the future we want. And these discussions were tough but successful. And in the result, at the end of 2017, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the proposal of IOC and proclaimed the Decade of Ocean Science for the years 2021-2030. So now we can speak about the science we need for the ocean we want. So you see on the slide the logo, and we started to think how to formulate the decade in more specific terms. But we all know that we need to achieve certain qualities of the ocean. It has to be clean, it has to sustain blue economy, it has to be productive, we have to work with data, data has to be available, the ocean needs to be understood. There are many disasters associated with the ocean. So this was to some extent reflected in the societal outcomes of the decade that are deliberately kept to some extent vague, so you can contribute to this and trigger thinking. And when I try to imagine how the science plan of ICES projects on the societal outcomes of the decade, I see a lot of parallels. So your science is ecosystem science. This is what the ocean management requires. We need to go from observations to research to new ways of managing ocean ecosystems and implement this through policies and governance arrangements like coastal zone management and maritime spatial planning. So we can have an integrated vision for the ocean management and then implement the vision. For example, together with European Commission, we have a roadmap. IOC has the roadmap towards having 30% of total area of exclusive economic zones covered with maritime special plan by the year 2030. So ICES can really contribute because your science is critical for that. So this is the vision of the decade, how it can be implemented. In this yellow rectangular, you see areas where we think that science is still lagging behind. Mapping of the ocean, still knowledge of ecosystems, particularly in global context of large marine ecosystems, the need to implement multi-hazard early warning systems, to have for the first time in history a common database, a portal for ocean data that will be open to the whole world, make ocean a part of Earth system science that would be really contributing to predictability of climate and many other things. And many other things. So if we are successful in moving forward the science, then this will trigger and also we'll be able to communicate the message and engage in information sharing. Then we will be able to also develop societal applications of this science. For example, coastal zone management, what you do the best, management of fish stocks, of aquaculture. This will be able also to contribute to probably climate solutions because we really need to think how to extract carbon from the atmosphere and have to do it safely. So basically a two-pronged approach in which we develop the most required areas of science and then proactively communicate this and trigger development of societal applications of this would be the way forward. So the most important thing is to engage people. And we do this through executive planning group. Anna Jobrun of Sweden is a member of this planning group. This is a group of very talented people. They are different. They are scientists, managers, communicators in science, people who know ocean economy. So we try to engage the thinking behind the decade, and we had the first meeting in Copenhagen on how we can move forward on the decade. Now we're conducting a series of regional meetings, and ICES is going to organize a meeting in Halifax at the beginning of January. And these meetings will also add to the implementation plan that we are supposed to deliver. So there will be the second global planning meeting in Paris in UNESCO in March. We hope to unroll the implementation plan for the decade at the second conference of United Nations on the Ocean in Lisbon at the beginning of June. And then, after the Executive Council of IUC, we will supply the first implementation plan of the decade to the United Nations General Assembly for consideration. Of course, we cannot just predict what is going to happen. This is not going to be a specific plan. This is going to be a deliberated strategy. And ICES can really contribute to this. But you know, when I speak about this, it's very difficult to have a feeling what really is going to be done. What is going to be done, I think, is a series of different, very ambitious projects. In the history of oceanography, we had important achievements associated with projects like World Oceans Regulation Experiment, Tropical Ocean Global Atmosphere, GLOBIC, JGOVS, and some other experiments. So we would like to have large-scale pilot projects to complete mapping of the ocean, because we don't have yet a map of the ocean depths, to embark on the polar ocean, create for the first time a sustainable observing system in the polar oceans, to go much deeper, to have an observing system for the deeper ocean, and also to start understanding how it functions, including the twilight zone as well. And I think what we can do together, all oceanographic community would engage in the project to predict the state of the ocean and also life in it. And what you're doing with molecular techniques, barcoding, DNA sampling, it may really help into this. So this information can be used to help adaptation of certain ecosystems, like coral ecosystems, because we are going to know, with also help of oceanography, the future state of climate. So maybe some selective breeding is possible. But basically what is important, that, United Nations recognized the importance of ocean science for sustainability of this planet. So our hands are now tied, but at the same, the possibilities are open, because, they will listen, governments will listen. It means that 195 governments recognize that oceanography is the driving force for sustainability. So how ICES can contribute? Have fantastic global science, and you have fantastic regional focus. I think we can combine this all. One important message is that this is not an IOC decade. This is decade for oceanographic community. So we really would like to offer to you this platform. Speak to the governments, speak to the funders, and try to implement once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for our science to become not just science based on curiosity, but a science that changes the world, that becomes mandatory, influential. And with that, we hope to achieve the ocean we need for the future we want. Thank you very much.
Anywhere you want.
Well, we are the comfortable ones.
Colleagues, friends, again, welcome to Gothenburg. My name is Jacob Granit. I'm Director General of the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. What a wonderful opening we have had. Especially thanks to the Outstanding Achievement Award and Bucklin for your prize, and for the excellent introductions by ICES representatives and our minister. We have talked about the opportunity to discuss a little bit more in detail the coming ocean decade and science and how that relates to the policy and scientific policy interface. The starting point for that would be the global goals. And in that context, I would like to just share with you that our agency, the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, we are also an institutional innovation in the sense that we manage freshwater management issues, coastal management issues, and marine and fisheries management. So we are covering a whole range of issues that relate to the sustainability of the seas. In particular, we work on goal number 6, which is about freshwater, sustainability of the freshwater, water supply and sanitation. We work on goal 15, biodiversity on land. We work, of course, on goal 14, which is about sustainability of the oceans. And we work on the climate issue. And, of course, on partnership agenda. So many of these things come together. And this panel, we look at that a little bit more in detail. So what are some of these science to policy interface issues that ICES can contribute to? We have a distinguished panel. I will introduce them all. And the questions, the overall questions we have talked about in advance of this discussion are 4 key questions. So what are the current scientific gaps to reach the broader SDG agenda from an ocean management perspective? What are some of the policy gaps to reach goal 14 in specific, related to the goals and targets? And what are some of the current policy measures we need to do to address to reach a blue economy? And of course, as we have heard here in the morning, what is the role of ICES science in this whole agenda? So these are some of the questions we will explore together in the panel. We also know that when it comes to goal 14, sustainability of oceans, is one of those goals where we are actually, according to the UN, lagging a bit behind. We also know that it's quite urgent. 4 out of these 10 targets are maturing already 2020. So there's a sense of urgency here to address these issues. That's also something we will have to bear in mind. So our distinguished panel to explore these issues in a conversation form consists of Dr. Vladimir Ryabinin, who you already heard, Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. Thank you for the introduction. Professor Elisa Morgera, who is Professor of Global Environment Law at the University of Strathclyde Law School in Glasgow, UK. Professor Manuel Barange, Director of Fisheries and Agriculture Policy, Resource Division at the Food and Agriculture Organization. And Professor Katherine Richardson, Professor of Biological Oceanography and leader of the Sustainability Science Center at the University of Copenhagen. So it's really a broad and distinguished panel to unpack these issues. The first setting the scene for the conversation will be an introduction by Dr. Cleopatra Doumbia-Henry. And Dr. Cleopatra Doumbia-Henry is president of the World Maritime University and a global leader in maritime law and labor standards and labor law at the law of international organizations. And we are also very proud in Sweden to host the World Maritime University. So please, Cleopatra, the stage is yours to provide some introductory remarks on the topic of policy and science interface. Welcome. Take that with me.
Executive Secretary of ICES, Mr. Granite, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here this morning with you at this ICES Annual Conference 2019 and to be able to speak to you on the vital topic of science policy needs, challenges for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals 2030 of the UN Sustainable Development Agenda. I'm very pleased to be doing so in my capacity as president of the World Maritime University, which is a unique postgraduate academic institution set up by the International Maritime Organization, a specialized agency of the United Nations 36 years ago, with the mission to be the world center of excellence in postgraduate education relating to maritime and ocean affairs, providing as well professional training and research while building global capacity and promoting sustainable development. The university offers 9 postgraduate specializations, 7 specializations in Malmo and 2 specializations in China in maritime and ocean affairs, and has a very extensive distance learning program as well as a capacity building program in place. To date, more than 5,000 graduates have come from 169 countries, and they have returned home to their countries to make a contribution to maritime and ocean sectors. Out of this number, we are still way behind in terms of gender empowerment. 21% are women. A lot more needs to be done in the area of maritime and ocean affairs to have more women, including women in ocean science. The United Nations General Assembly in December last year adopted a resolution, which it does annually, and that resolution continues to recognize the importance of the World Maritime University, which celebrated this year 36 years of its existence. And that resolution confirms the effective capacity building role in the field of maritime and environmental protection, as well as in the role in international exchange and transfer of knowledge, and welcomes the inauguration last year of the Global Ocean Institute, which also has been set up by the university. It urges member states, intergovernmental organizations, and other bodies to make voluntary financial contributions to the university because, of course, unfortunately, we are exclusively dependent on voluntary contributions. I want to turn, however, now to the SDGs and the unique role that they have in that they cover issues that affect us all. The SDGs reaffirm our international commitment to end poverty permanently everywhere. More importantly, they involve us all to build a more sustainable, safer, more prosperous planet for all of humanity. Perhaps it is best to start by pointing out that marine science has contributed greatly, as we've just learned a while ago, to our collective understanding of the pivotal importance of the oceans to life on Earth. Science has also demonstrated that humankind has degraded our oceans, and that we are now paying for this deterioration in the form of pollution, climate change, and lost natural resources and capital. Why the IOC Secretary General has just told us about the incredible state that we are currently in. I think everyone in this auditorium agrees that the science is now needed more than ever to help inform, to guide, and to underpin the policies needed to reverse the cycle of decline in ocean health and to regrow the blue economy. Likewise, science must be responsive to the needs of policymakers and to ensure that the research that we undertake is delivered in a form that is digestible by those who are in a position to effect policy change. The SDGs are a fantastic tool for engaging the international community. They provide us with a frame for understanding that there are challenges that need solving. However, to get the most value out of these, it is necessary to be strategic about how we achieve the goals, which in many ways is not an easy task. These goals have universal support with numerous stakeholders committed to the framework. The goals are divided in targets. Countries are expected to deliver reports on indicators, which were developed with each target, and to provide information on their status and to monitor progression towards the achievement of the goals. This approach is interesting because some of the indicators seem to be quite far from target. For example, if we take target 14.1, which states as follows, and I quote, "By 2025, prevent and significantly reduce marine pollution of all kinds, in particular from land-based activities, including marine debris and nutrient pollution." The matching indicator for this target is index of coastal eutrophication and floating plastic debris density. However, there are more than 100,000 pollutants in the sea. Eutrophication indicates nutrient runoff, and plastic is a type of debris, but neither provide a proper status. If indicators do not cover the target, there is indeed a risk that some countries will just deliver on the indicator without optimal progress towards the target. Another challenge is that the SDG framework applies to the entire world, which it should. But as a consequence of regional differences, some indicators are highly relevant for one country and not for another. In addition, national and regional agendas exist that address sub-issues within the SDG 14. And there are international directives, laws, and treaties, for example, in the case of the EU, which covers part of the targets in SDG 14 in European directives. In a recent survey of the UN SDG on how frequently the global goal appears in leaders' top priority, it was found out that goal 14 came last. Goal 14 came last. Only 5.4% of the countries surveyed selected this goal as one of their 6 top priorities among the 14 SDGs. We've got a long way to go. Implementing the SDG goals should be complementary to national agendas and frameworks. One of the most challenging issues with ocean governance is that collaboration is essential and that it is integrated and inclusive. The reality, however, is very different in various parts of the world, not only with respect to scientific inquiry, to which ICES contributes so much, but also to ecosystem and the status of the ecosystem, but also regarding political, social, cultural, and economic factors. All of these need to be taken into account. How to obtain all SDG goals simultaneously is a challenge. This is particularly true as the SDG framework deals with such a wide variety of goals, all with their own targets. The fulfillment of some of these targets is even often counterproductive for the fulfillment of others. And even with SDG 14, this contradiction exists because the way we use the ocean interacts in most cases with conservation objectives. This also raises issues concerning human rights and accountability, which need to be addressed. It is therefore important to consider who the goals are for, how best are they being used, and who should know about them. In my view, communication is key, and this is one of those areas gaps exist. We need to be better at communicating. Communication is also key in the exchange of information between scientists, but not only them. ICES is a good representation of how that exchange of information can take place there. But also with managers and with policymakers. How do we translate the scientific information in what is digestible for the managers and policymakers that must now take the decisions relating to your findings. Again, this is challenging at several levels and for several reasons, including differences in understanding, the absence of a systematic approach, and in some cases, probably in many cases, instances of the lack of time. Also, the independence of researchers is an important factor which has a bearing on the implementation of the SDGs. And it is here that ICES plays an important role in this respect. Last, but by no means least, it is important to look forward, to make a plan for what we do after we arrive at the target date of 2030. It's only 10 years away. And as I indicated earlier, we are far behind with SDG 14. Overall, it is easy to conclude that the needs and challenges for achieving the SDGs, including SDG 14, are vast and complex. Nevertheless, the blueprint for implementation is moving forward steadily. Because of the nature of the challenges that we face, science, as well as scientists, in collaboration with organizations such as ICES, can make a significant contribution by ensuring that the process of implementation is more targeted and more efficient. I hope this helps frame the discussion that follows and allows the diversity of the delegates here today to see how their own research relates to the other disciplines and contributes to achieving SDG 14 in partnership with your marine science colleagues over the coming decade. In conclusion, I have to hope, and probably we all have to hope, that the occasion to be able to make change and to continue to make progress will continue. I will also take the opportunity to invite you all to our university in Malmö. As I indicated, the world's leading postgraduate education institution that is exclusively devoted to capacity development in the maritime and ocean fields, as we press on with our collective mission to implement the UN SDGs, and I thank you very much.
Trying to get the SDG pictures back, if someone can help me. Doesn't seem to work. Thank you, Cleopatra, for that overview. I think we are warming up for our discussion. You have stressed the urgency of reaching the broad perspective. All the SDGs are relevant to our task to build a sustainable society. So what we'll do now, I will ask my panelists here to have a couple of minutes introduction from their perspective each, and then we'll pick up questions from that. I will start with Professor Richardson, and we talked about yesterday your experience. You have worked on deep natural scientific issues, and now covering global governance. You have a strong interest in how to manage the global commons, and this is what we are talking about here. The oceans belong to all. And you also worked a lot on the planetary boundary concept, which sets sort of some form of limitations, perhaps, to growth, depending on how one look upon that. So from that perspective, and with your research experience, can you sort of explore a little bit for us on what you see as the research gaps on how to achieve SDG 14 and perhaps related goals? So please.
I can, Jakob, but I'd really like to start a different place, because we've been talking all morning about sustainable management and sustainability, and you know, what is sustain? I'm still enough of a scientist to want to know what I'm talking about, So how do we define sustainability? And I think our understanding of sustainability is under evolution. If you Google it, you'll get the Brundtland report that says, oh, well, it's more than economy, it's also a social and environmental component. But nobody at that point in '87, when the Brundtland report came out, could say what is the environmental component. And since then, we've gotten a much better idea of what it is, that really we have to keep our demand for the Earth's resources within the supply of them, that we get rich using the Earth's resources. So, I mean, and I don't think sustainability is a place or a state. I think it's a process. If you look at these goals that we can't look at, but we were supposed to be able to look at, then the well-being of humanity, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, everything from poverty to getting fresh water and so on, comes at a cost. And it comes at a cost from the global commons, which is 13, 14, and 15, climate and biodiversity. So ocean is in that. Now, things are getting better down here around human well-being, but every single one of the 13, 14, and 50s is going down. The trend is negative. So we are nowhere near sustainability in any way. And the only way that we can get to sustainability is by releasing the pressure on the global commons. So we have to look at the arrows, the interactions between the raising human welfare or well-being and the cost on the global commons. And that means that we have to move out of our boxes. I don't think we should be arguing for more marine science or more ocean science. I think we should be arguing for sustainability science that looks at the interactions. And because I think debates are better when they're a little provocative, I would say to you, Cleo, that I don't care that number 14 is last on people's lists. As long as they get 12 and 13 right, 14's going to come on its own. So I think we need to be, I mean, what's special about this Sustainable Development Goals is two things. One, for the first time, we have an international agreement that acknowledges our resources are limited. Despite the fact we've had pictures of the Earth from space for 40, 50 years, 60 years, we've never accepted the fact politically that our resources are limited. The SDGs do it. And those 17 issues that are represented there, none of them are new, and most of them already have an UN agreement that deals with them. So what's interesting is the fact they came into the same framework, so it's the interactions. We need science that explores interactions. That's interactions in ecology, that's interactions with humanity, that's all the way around. And you know, ICES is evolving. I was very active in ICES about 25 years ago, and the younger people here will be shocked to learn that I was radical, because I thought we should have a working group on the ecological interactions of fisheries. Oh, the old boys we had in those days, I mean, I was really a radical. And of course now, that's nothing. So our understanding is evolving and our science is evolving as well. But I think we need to go more into interactions and sustainability science.
So from that point of view, it would be great if somebody can help us to get the 17 goals up on the screen. So, I mean, sustainability science, so do you think then the SDG goals, do they help us in that regard, or are they too many? Is it too complex to understand? Do we need a super goal somehow, or is this adequate?
This is the problem when you get a bunch of scientists to assess the goals. No, they're not internally consistent. But the amazing thing about the goals is that you've got politicians to agree on them. It's a vision for how we want to share the Earth's resources among 10 billion people. And it's absolutely amazing that we got a political agreement. It wouldn't happen in 2019, but there was something really special about 2015, that we got the Paris Agreement and we got the SDGs. And as scientists, we can rip them apart. But as a global vision for where we want to go, they are a miracle. And you know, I'm glad they're all there, but it's not the boxes themselves that are interesting, it's the interactions. Good.
I think it's a nice starting point. How deep we go into the deep science, or how broad we are, I think it sets the scene very nicely. So we move on to Professor Manuel Barange. So you come from deep knowledge on fisheries management, ecosystem science, and as I understand, we talked about yesterday, you have been more and more working on the climate challenge. You have been part of the IPCC report on the ocean and the cryosphere, which is just about to be released. So maybe you want to pick up on where Dr. Richardson left, but also please freely outline what you see then here as the biggest gaps in science and policy.
So first, I mean, it's a tough order to follow Katherine, because I mean, you're lucky that you're not a politician, because if you were a prime minister, the headline tomorrow would be Katherine Richardson doesn't care about SDG 14. And that is part of the problem. One of the problems that we have is that we tend to have a binary approach to anything. You know, so fisheries management, for example, it will be equivalent to this glass of water. There's a level of water in it. So imagine that I'm drinking water through a straw, and somebody's pouring water into the glass, and I only look at the level of the glass once a year or once an hour or something. So if it goes below that line, then someone says, "There you are. Sustainability is, you know, you failed. You know, you're supposed to keep it at that level, and you're not keeping at that level." We're always looking at things in a very binary approach, and that is part of it's a problem. Imagine any of us. You know, are we succeeding or failing as human beings? You know, look at yourself. Are you failing or succeeding as a daughter or as a son, as a mother or as a father? Well, depends, right? Things are very broad, and we never look at sustainability from that perspective. And sustainability is a bummer. You're right. It's a process. You know, you keep trying, and sometimes you succeed, and sometimes you fail. Now, bringing into the issue of science, because this community had been outstanding in establishing a link between science and policy. And, you know, science and policy are like two cars in a race. Sometimes they overtake each other. You know, sometimes the science overtakes the policy, and the policy is just, you know, rushing to get into a response. And sometimes it's the other way around. It's the policy that overtakes the science, and science then starts trying to respond, and sometimes overstretches itself. And that we have to be quite aware of, because sometimes science overstretches itself, tries to answer to a policy, even though we do not have the knowledge to do that, but we do. Now, the issue of science as well, I'm a scientist. I think I was born a scientist, because I spend more time looking at ants than people, and I think that is the definition of a natural scientist, and I'm sure that I'll die a scientist. But scientists, we all have one problem, and that is that we think that if the world knew what we know, they will think like we think. And that is profoundly wrong. We are a very strange part of humanity, scientists. And so science influences policy, but it doesn't dictate policy. And I think that this day and age, what worries me most is two things. How do we ensure evidence-based decision-making, so that the decisions are based on science and evidence? And second, what is evidence? Because we are at a time where the information overload is such that there's too much information to validate, to cross-check. So everyone has a bit of information that supports any view that you want to have. So how does this community, for example, balance that and decides what's the process that evidence is used to influence decision-making? And I think that if we were to achieve that, we would have contributed something to this debate.
Thank you, Manuel. We talked yesterday. Now you took the angle that science influences policy, and that's what ICES has been doing quite a lot. But you also talked about yesterday that the customers, ICES delivers advice to customers, politicians, or other decision makers. So the question, and also the customers in this regard, as you framed it, are the ones paying for the advice. So is it also that the customers somehow need to better understand what sustainability is, or also what ICES can provide? Should it go from that direction too? Not only scientists understanding better how to frame the policy, but also the ones that ask for evidence or science.
Well, the thing is that, you know, everyone can be an advisor, and everyone advises. You know, it's a free world to do that, and we often fill our mouths with, you know, we should do this and we should do that. But really, advice is a very formal process, and it's a process that starts on a political level, with the establishment of objectives. What is your objective when you manage X, Y, or Z? You set up those objectives, and then you ask those that are capable of providing that evidence to bring the data, that information that allows you to match those objectives. In the case of ICES and in the case of many organizations, that advice is paid. There's a customer that says, I need this information, or I need to make a decision on this matter, so please bring me the evidence so that I can make a decision. And sometimes, or very often, the evidence that we use to make that decision is limited, and it is limited for a very good reason, because the advice that you need to give has to be strong enough, certain enough, that it could be facing a challenge. And the politician or the customer that requires that advice needs to make sure that if someone challenges the decision that they make, that at least it's not the evidence that will be found wanting. So that limits a lot what sort of information we use for advice. Now, ICES is very good in this regard, in my view, because it's got this advisory process and the design process, and there's like two wheels that spin in different speeds, you know. And what you want in an institution like ICES is to make sure that when you have a different type, a different question, a different request for advice, that the science that you've been developing over years has the information to respond to that question. So that question may not be known yet. So the science continues to develop, and you mustn't limit the science to the actual needs that you have for advice now. But you need to make sure that when the needs of advice change, the science is ready.
That's a big challenge, to have the science ready for the advisory that change. Yeah. Thanks so much. A good introduction. And if we go back to Dr. Vladimir Ryabinin, you outlined quite in detail the science needs to reach goal 14, as I understood your presentation. I mean, and you have a very long career in oceanography and meteorological research. You clearly see these connections, and your first slide was on carbon emissions, and that we are far from reaching the socioeconomic pathways that are desirable. So we heard from you already what you saw as key priorities in the ocean decade. Quite a lot of sort of natural science needs, understanding the ocean, seafloor, and so forth. But if you put on the policy hat, and what do you think are the key needs from that perspective? So from that, deep natural science to the policy needs, if you want to outline some of that thinking from your end.
We started a very good discussion on sustainability, and then we turned a little bit on how to really achieve something. So in my presentation, I think I try to present to you all how we think, how we can change the world by at least moving in the domain of forward in the domain of ocean science. Indeed, the situation is quite dramatic in terms of the speed of change in climate and in the ocean, and we operate with quite formalized mechanisms. We have formulation of sustainable development goals, and Cleopatra spoke about how sometimes non-representative is this for the whole world. So, we really need to trigger good decisions in governments, in stakeholders, in those who make the decisions, who implement the decisions, who invest. And we all know that the world is led by decisions that sometimes are not transparent, and how science can change that situation. Science, needs to be mainstreamed, including ocean science. This is the only way for us to have an objective picture of the planet, of the ocean, and also have some ability to predict the consequences of certain decisions. So we know now in the climate domain, if we inject this amount of carbon, then the temperature will be like this. Then there are some scenarios that show that the world will change like this and what will be the impact on the ecosystems. So I think we slowly but surely we are getting to a new picture of the world when science is informing better the decision-making system. So we are doing our part when it comes to the ocean. That part is very significant because it affects almost all domains of human well-being. But we haven't yet reached that level of openness, ability to provide that information that really makes people understand what is happening. So we haven't yet mainstreamed the whole system. So in terms of policy, what we have in the laws and the international agreements, they are quite interesting in the sense that they are not really laws. There are only few laws. United Nations Law of the Sea is a real convention that needs to be kind of completely observed and monitored. We have exclusive economic zones, have territorial seas, but all conventions when it comes to environment are largely aspirational. The Paris Agreement, the Agreement on Climate, despite it is an agreement by member states and is signed by government and ratified by many of them, then of course some of them withdrew later, but at the same time this remains as an aspirational agreement because there is no mechanism to implement it. In the ocean, and this is probably the most important thing for me to say today, is there is no agreement that obliges everyone to save the ocean health. This agreement actually is emerging, and there is in the United Nations a discussion, and Anne-Christine Brusendorff, your Secretary General, was at those discussions in the third session, second half of August. So for the first time in history, this regime that is legally binding is emerging. But this regime is a convention of conservation, sustainable use of biodiversity beyond areas of natural jurisdiction. This is about health of the ocean and life in the ocean and in the high seas. So in the zone that is a global common that nobody really cares. For the first time, this is emerging. But the discussions there are on how we conduct assessments, how we manage the zone, but again, there is no implementation plan for that. So we hope very much that the science now will become exact in the sense that we will observe the ocean. We'll be able to predict the health of the ocean, the conditions of stocks, the consequences of decisions. And this is what we're going to achieve with your help during the decade of ocean science for sustainable development. And every word counts here. Ocean science for sustainable development, not just for pleasure, for curiosity, to take good decisions. I think this is what we can achieve. And like also Cleopatra said, communication is important. Opening the science is important. Transparency in decisions and observations is important. So meteorological world has the science. Oceanographic world is lagging behind. But we have to understand the importance of our science. The politicians are more or less on board with that. And we can move forward towards the new stage of oceanography. That will become a system to not only support decision-making system, but also influence decision-making system. That's the vision that we have.
Are you concerned that science and evidence-based science is questioned today by politicians to a large regard?
No, I don't
so
want...
do we need more science to convince them that we know what will happen? And why science? I mean, I can see that science is questioned, especially in the climate debate. Still.
No, this is a big issue, how to make science influential and really able to change the decisions and the policies. I think science is getting there, slowly but surely. But I think we need some accelerators for that. And we need, for example, for ICES, I think, it will be useful for your leadership to think how you can formulate your science so that it becomes more policy oriented and more influential. We invest more and more in the conditions of very scarce resources. We invest more and more into communication. So more people know, such things like plastic in the ocean. I think Europe knows this. Many developed countries know this well. So the changes are happening, and changes are now proliferating in the domain of policy. The pace of this is not sufficient. You spoke yourself, Jakob, about these 4 goals that are going to mature in 2020. None of them are going to be actually achieved, but the movement towards achieving those goals is getting stronger and stronger. So the conferences that exist, our Ocean Conference that is going to be in Oslo in October, the Ocean Conference 2017, they are changing the world. And more people, including high-level politicians, understand the importance of that. There is the high-level panel that was organized by Erna Solberg, the Prime Minister of Norway, that has 13 heads of state of government. This is a huge political force. And these are honest people trying to really present to the world and make the good decisions. So I think the tide is changing, which is actually surprising given the human nature. But I think we so far in terms of the state of the environment, and this is exactly what Manuel was quoted in this particular case. There will be this report of IPCC on ocean and cryosphere in changing climate. The report will be unveiled soon. I have no right to say what is in the report. But so far in terms of the state of the environment, we are a little bit losing. But the momentum for protecting the environment is picking up also quite fast. So we are getting there slowly but surely.
You are positive. That's good.
Yeah.
This is good because we talked about what is sustainability, the role of advisory and the role of science. And then if we turn to Professor Elisa Morgera, because you have been pondering on these issues quite a lot. You research areas such as science as a human right. You have been asking questions from a perspective of who benefits from science, who sets the research agenda, and accountability. And these are all very difficult questions, but I think they relate very well now into what we talked about. Would you like to expand on that from your perspective?
Yes, no, thank you. And I think all the comments so far show that I think one of the big challenge for all the people in this room is the disconnects in people's minds, our own minds, and politicians' minds about the importance of ocean science for human well-being on Earth, for all the other SDGs. And well, I mean, I'm hoping I can share your enthusiasm about the fact that SDG 14 is not seen as much of a priority as others. It is a symptom of that disconnection. And my work is on particularly international biodiversity law and international human rights law. And really what's interesting there is that those areas of law help us to see the relevance of marine science for human well-being, for all the other SDGs, and to see where the disconnects are. They provide recognition for the importance of advancement in marine science. They also show the accountability where governments are falling short by not listening to maybe certain fundings in marine science, and therefore not contributing to policy coherence there. But there's also a factor that I think is quite important, is that they do hold a mirror to ourselves and ask us questions, as you mentioned, about, well, who are we doing the science for? Who's benefit from our scientific advances? Are our findings really benefit the needs of the most vulnerable, children, the poor? And who is setting the agenda for research? And are we collaborating enough in setting that agenda? And one thing that I think seems very important to me was mentioned in Cleo's speech is the idea of partnership. One of the SDGs about global partnership, and that speaks a lot to science as well, and how science can contribute to the SDGs. The ecosystem approach, which is a key driving force also of the people in this room, looks at all those matters that were evoked before, not only interconnections in the natural world, but also humans as part of that world, cultural, economic, spiritual elements. And I think that calls for a deeper form of collaboration that is a genuine partnership and a fair partnership in science. And I would like to just share some insights based on my experience in the past 2 years, working with colleagues in the UK, in Africa, in the South Pacific, and in the Caribbean, trying to build together a global interdisciplinary collaboration on ocean governance that's focused on sustainability, that is integrated and inclusive. And I think what's been incredible and incredibly difficult has been how do we come to define research questions, then build on all the findings from areas of science that are traditionally still quite separate. There's distinctions within the marine sciences, there's some collaboration with the social sciences and with law and economics, but we're still scratching the surface of that. We're not using that collaboration to rethink our own research agenda and how we collaborate with others. And then how do we move forward in terms of working together? And I think one of the questions that are arising from the global planning on the UN Decade on Ocean Science is how do we develop more effective and fairer forms of collaboration? And that has to do with how do we effectively share data, different types of data, ensure interoperability of all the existing databases out there, and how we make sure that different colleagues in different countries are all equally able to use that data. How we ensure recognition of different colleagues at different career stages in joint publications, what are the ethics of scientific collaboration, and how do we move, I think, from engaging stakeholders to transdisciplinarity, to having different holders of knowledge, which may not be the academic peer-reviewed knowledge we're in the business of, to become core researchers with us and contribute with their insights and understanding to the shaping of our research and how our research can be more responsive to those needs. And I think that's what becomes, the integrated science base that we were referring to, and the ability, I think the point, you really point the finger at the right. The challenge, how we predict the consequences of the research findings, has to do with the collaboration across all sciences and thinking across all the dimensions of sustainability, which are true, they all pull us in different direction, and yet that emphasis towards hidden trade-offs is what we need to focus on, and where true collaboration can really make a change.
So, but you say that we are just barely scratching the surface on understanding these maybe these new elements of deeper understanding of the challenge we have in front of us. So what is your advice then on how can we accelerate that learning, if it's a lot about social learning in addition to natural resource?
Well, I mean, one question is that if natural scientists want to make a change, that change will happen in a societal and in a social process. And so the engagement with other sciences, social sciences, and humanities should become something that's integral to how we all do science, as opposed to something that we see as an aside, as something that somebody else will do and communicators will do. It's something that becomes how we do science ourselves. And I think that raises two questions. One, how we conceive research projects, who we talk to, and also the conditions under which funders put us in developing those research projects, how much time and resources we are given to truly engage in dialogue with other colleagues working at other sides of the sustainability dilemma, really understand the research that's going on in different countries and where our colleagues are at with their own research findings, and how then through that dialogue we identify both reciprocal blind spots, but the questions that none of the sciences on its own are able to address.
It's a short story here. We have been working, personally I come from the freshwater management domain, and I worked into the oceans over the last years, and we have conferences in the water domain on number 6, freshwater management. And clearly there's a quite sophisticated community of of people working on freshwater management from a governance perspective over many years, and the natural science. But the governance part is the most challenging. And we have the annual World Water Week here in Stockholm every year. But for the first time, after many years of working, we actually had at the conference an Ocean Day. And the idea was, of course, to see what are the connections between what we do on land, in the management, and what's happening in the oceans. And going back to the topic of 80% of pollution from land comes from land to the oceans. So there's a huge, strong connect. So if we want to solve the oceans, we need to work with our upstream communities. But these are just two very distinct communities in methodology, in the way they engage with stakeholders, and the way they undertake scientific research. But we share so much. But there is a movement, a change to get them together. But I'm not sure it asks your question, response to your question, if we really are getting economic and social science in and ask the question and provide enough time. That's still a challenge. Cleopatra, if you have now heard a little bit what our colleagues have said, partly reflecting on your speech. I can hear the topic of understanding the whole perspective, the sustainability broadly, but also what comes out from many here is the issue about communication. Communication is the ability to speak to too many, not informing, it's communication. Yet we see people are still not, there's still disconnects between what we try to communicate from a scientific point of view and the decision making. Do you have any views on this now when you heard our colleagues reflect upon it?
Well, I would just take the UN SDGs itself as representative of that challenge of communication. And one of the, I think, and that's where, you know, whether you were the scientific community or the human rights community or the academic community, whatever we are, one of the things that the United Nations in adopting those 17 goals wanted us to do for the first time now, let's try and do that, was look into the way in which these various goals interact and interrelate. No one goal on its own can be achieved to the detriment of the other goals, or without taking along, looking at which are the other goals that are most significant for, you know, the sort of way ahead. If we really wanted to change the dynamic, we wanted to change the way we speak, we wanted to change the impact on our, you know, with our planet. I think the bringing together and the decision made by the United Nations that all of these goals are indivisible is something that we should never undermine. Of course, we will have those that are more like family, you know, in other words, you can put them all together. But I think, you know, and therefore I'm coming to Christine who made the remark that it doesn't really matter, goal 14. Well, goal 14 matters, otherwise goal 14 shouldn't have been there. And goal 14 is such a major goal for what we are trying to do in terms of the ocean. So we really have to embrace that goal and see how it interrelates with other goals, because they are you know, interrelated and indivisible. And therefore goal 14 and land, and goal 15, life on land, or if you take goal 6, which is clean water and sanitation, you know, the goals are interrelated and indivisible, and there are a lot of interactions that we can, and then to create coherence, to try and work across boundaries, across whether we are lawyers, we are scientists, or we are educators, whatever we are, we've got to see how best we can work with them. And if the United Nations fails on that interaction this time, and the whole idea was, we've had many of these before, you know, including the 1992 conference. So this is the unique opportunity, and we have a young generation of people that are looking forward to us to make sure we make the right decisions that will impact on the future of humanity. And we all know the oceans are in a serious state. You know, the BBNJ process that's ongoing now is having a huge challenge. We don't even know if it will, you know, it's clear that it's not going to complete its work this year, and probably not next year. So, you know, there are such challenges there in which you know, that what everybody is trying to do, and so many more people have come on board than ever before. Yet the challenges ahead in terms of getting agreements to do anything. So one of those things about the UN SDGs, which is fantastic, is that it is not a treaty. It is a call for action, which enables all of us to pick and choose, but not to pick and choose to the detriment of others. See how we can build strength by bringing in the, trying to see where the interactions where we can work with each other together. And I think the scientific community has an important responsibility as well as an opportunity today to make science more, to make it reach to the man on the street, to get it more understandable, to get it translated into language and your work into outcomes that policymakers, those that take the big decisions and the final outcomes of these conferences, that they can understand them enough to make them, of course, make them as academics. We are all tempted to be very academic, and it is very difficult always for our messages to go through. We've got to be able to now work together to translate the way we speak, the articulation of science, because science is complicated. Many of us don't understand the sciences, but you can make science understandable to the ordinary person. We link them up with the goals in ways that make them understandable, how the two can, the outcomes of the ICES work, which is phenomenal. How does that reach more broadly to the ordinary, to those that are in high schools and in, they don't have to be at university to learn all of that. How do we reach more broadly? So I do think that we have an opportunity to try and speak with the way in which these goals today reach out to everyone.
I see, Katherine.
Yeah, before I go from here from here with a big stamp on my forehead that says SDG 14 hater, I would like to say that I obviously I think it's important that SDG 14 is on the list. But when you ask governments to prioritize what they're doing, it doesn't surprise me that 14 ends up off their radar, because there's very little they can do about SDG 14. And that makes it very different than the freshwater one, because countries can make rules and laws about what to do there. The ocean is much more complicated, because it is in international agreements, or at least inspirational intentional agreements. It's not so much the individual country, except maybe in their 200-mile zone, but most of the ocean is outside of government jurisdiction. Now that means, of course, that doesn't mean, of course, it doesn't have governance. And I would say maybe, the title of this, where we're supposed to be looking at the policy interface. Well, policy usually means law. We're back to our individual countries, and there's very little they can do. And if you think about it, in this that I drew before, where you had human well-being here and the global commons here, in this area of tension, this built-in conflict, the infrastructure through which we demand the global resources comes from, it's in the private hands. So business is actually closer to be able to do something to the global commons than the policy. And there's some really interesting research going on at the moment where they have brought together the CEOs of the most important companies that have to do with seafood trade and the whole, trying to get science-based targets into what they're doing and bypassing the political process. So I'm just trying to say that I think one of the problems with the ocean is the fact that the politicians that we're turning to save it have very little power, and we need to look at new partnerships in terms of how to get there. I think, as well as scientists, that we're suffering from the fact that we are employed, we are promoted, and we are rewarded for being experts in detail, and nobody gives us any credit for having the big picture. And there I agree with you very much, Cleo, that this is important, and we have to, as scientists, relate ourselves to it, because it helps us be able to communicate the big picture.
Manuel, I think you want to maybe talk a bit about global governance, because I think you argue that there actually is more governance than we think.
Well, yes, I wanted to talk about something different, but I'll start with Katherine. I'll have another go at Katherine.
Oh, good.
And the majority of the ocean is outside single government control, but that doesn't mean that they are outside government control. They are inside multi-government control. So the UNCLOS expects all waters to be managed by governments, by all governments, and there's a plethora of different types of institutions, from regional management organizations, regional fisheries bodies, regional seas programs, that link countries, different countries in different parts of the world. And the ones that work the best, surprise, surprise, are those that have more money and more political will. And the ones that do not work that well is because they haven't got political will and they haven't got sufficient funding. So what is the solution? Well, it's pretty simple, right? It's give them more money and more political will. But there is a lot of governance in the oceans. The high seas are not the Wild West that some people claim. There are actually extreme volumes of regulations. The implementation is very patchy. And that is life. That is life. We have to improve the way that things are implemented. But I wanted to get to something perhaps a bit more controversial, and that is, what is the engagement with science and society, and what Claire was talking about, influencing the people and the public. And I feel that we live in a world of in shock. A world in shock, I would describe it. If you see people reading the newspapers, you can almost see them shaking their heads as they read the newspapers. Every headline is more shocking than the previous one, and that shock has led to me to a state of fear. People live in fear. Fear of climate, fear of politics, fear of war, fear of hunger, fear everywhere. And if your mind is occupied by fear, it cannot be occupied by facts. That's not my sentence. It's a beautiful sentence from a Swedish scientist, Hans Rosling, one of my heroes. And if you haven't heard of him, shame on you. But if you haven't read the latest book published after he died, Factfulness, go to any library here or to the airport and buy it and read it from cover to cover. Facts are crucial in understanding the world. Numbers are crucial. You cannot understand the world without numbers, but numbers are not sufficient to understand the world. Now, scientists, in fact, I think that we have contributed to this state of shock in our own field, the state of shock and the state of fear. And that is because many people in this audience are editors of scientific journals or associate editors and certainly reviewers. In the best journals, you cannot publish nowadays unless your headline is as more shocking as the previous paper that somebody published. And that has led to an escalation of messaging. An escalation and messaging that is undermining science, in my view. It's undermining science. When somebody, for example, publishes a paper that says fisheries will collapse in 2048, and that goes through the peer review process, shame on the peer review process. Shame on the peer review process. We as scientists have also a commitment to stick to facts and to make sure that facts are not misused, not misinterpreted, and not escalated in a way that contributes to the state of fear and shock in the world. That is an obligation for scientists, and we are not keeping that obligation.
But if these strong facts that you say we deliver, they should in theory lead to policy change then, right? That's the idea of them being so strong. So, and here we are saying there's a gap. We are not addressing the oceans enough. We are far behind. So there's something here that doesn't fully match. And I'll give you an example. In Sweden right now, we have there's a distrust, if I put it that way, in the public debate about the whole scientific approach to manage fisheries and ecosystems. So we are being questioned from the way science is delivered and carried out, to the way decisions are being made, to the way fisheries is managed, to the way the traceability system works, and to the ecosystem. So it's a very complex dynamic, and that's not good for anything. And we don't even get the messages out clearly about the complexity in the system. And I don't know what you think about that, because I think it's something here, because we deal with different aspects of a value chain. There is scientific advice, it's decision making, it's implementation, and it's follow up, and there's a big understanding of that.
But the reason why it is challenged, why this, in the public eye, a challenge of scientific opinion is fundamentally because there is too much information overload. It's an information overload out there where there's a lot of contrasting information in even fields of science where there shouldn't be any doubt. You know, vaccinations, for example.
Yep.
I mean, Vladimir, you talked earlier on about no agreement to sustain ocean health. But of course, if you want a political agreement driven by that, you have to then distill that down into what actually means ocean health, what are the indicators, what are our objectives, what are our trade-offs, because there are always trade-offs. This thing of win-win solutions is the biggest stupidity on earth. There are no win-win solutions. There's always a trade-off. And the public sees this continuous plethora of bits of information going backwards and forwards. And then they doubt. And if they doubt with vaccines, how are they not going to doubt about fisheries management when they can't see the fish? So, you know, that's part of the problem. And we have to make sure, sometimes scientists need to be boring. Boring in saying, look, we are moving in this direction and it's going okay. And we will turn left when we are being too much to the right and vice versa. But it is going in this direction and we will continue to. But we don't, you know, we try to say, oh my God, we turn to the left, you know. No, just we have to be boring sometimes.
That's perhaps the managers who should say that then. We should say that. We are going in the right direction, based on the scientific advice we get, which is an intricate thing. Do you have any view on this? Are we designing the right science?
Well,
are we asking the right questions?
I think we are, but we need to put the science together. And I think one of the questions about the governance that came up is that, well, governments have obligations and they have to regulate any single operator on the oceans, be that within their national jurisdictions or beyond. But it is a hard act to do, and partly because it requires several pieces of scientific evidence to come together, and the identification of trade-offs to be as robust as possible. And that's, I think, the challenge of marine spatial planning and the blue economy, which you also mentioned earlier on. Do we have enough science, considering how science is specialized and how it feeds into different sectors and responds to different also sectoral demands, to have that better sense of what the trade-offs are and what the hidden trade-offs are? And also, I mean, if that information goes to governments cooperating with each other, they have different capacities and power in those discussions, how we can have a dialogue where all the different governments can have a voice in that conversation, and raise concerns about aspects of the science that, when put into tensions with other sectors and demands, how can that be a helpful dialogue and a productive dialogue? So to my mind, yes, I mean, we have to focus on facts, but we also have to bring different areas of science together which are currently not necessarily comparing notes with each other. And, you know, fisheries science, there's, as far as I've learned in the past couple of years, there's areas of fisheries science that focus on particular sectors, be that, you know, artisanal as opposed to recreational, as opposed to large scale. Is that advice integrating, taking into account all these areas of understanding of human interactions and the implications now arising from climate change? And how does that science then, how can we understand what it tells us when we take into account the science from and the understanding of biological resources, of mineral resources in the oceans, the other pressures brought in by more newer uses of the oceans, be that renewables or other? How, I think, the bringing of the science and the different scientific insights together, and then how do we balance that understanding? And that's where I think other sciences come in, social sciences, economics. How do we create that space for very strong, robust dialogue? Because it's not just one challenge at a time. And as scientists, we have to maybe equip ourselves not only to bring that very robust and clear science, but how to support that understanding across sectors and multiple pressures, and understanding where there are blind spots in our research and where the hidden trade-offs are hiding.
So if all of you then think about this question, so there is a ICES research strategy, it's approved, and our conversation has been about understanding the very broad perspective. So do we have what are the next steps that ICES can take? As we have a lot of young researchers here also. Do you have any recommendations for for the next 3 years that actually grasp these complex issues that we talked about, sustainability in a broader sense. Vladimir, do you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Jakob. You know, I would like, but before I answer that question, or try to answer that question rather, I would like to pick up from what Manuel left us in the discussion of health and vaccination. And I'm sorry, I have to give you my own example. So I was skiing and I broke my shoulder, but it was repaired. And now I carry suitcases mostly in my right hand, the broken hand. Then I had a problem with my heart, but the stent was installed there. And I ran yesterday quite some distance. So, you know, I had a cataract, but, you know, it was operated. I now see without glasses. So had it happened last century, would be having dry hand, I would have died, and I would be blind.
Progress.
The situation has changed. This is the power of technology and science, because medicine is a science. So our science of oceanography, environmental management, is also progressing quite well. So my statement would be that in order to manage and survive in this complex environment with more and more people, with uneven consumption, with limited resources, our world, including environment, including the ocean, has to become more and more scientifically managed. And that is possible. The science has to be based on observations, analysis, understanding, prediction, communication, and affecting decision-making. That's the mainstream. And the decade probably will help this. At least we try to formulate it in such a way that will help. So my advice to ICES would be to use that paradigm, that science is more important for managing this complicated world, and find your place, because what you're doing is very important. Fishery management is important. Ocean dynamics and ocean ecosystems are important. You can find your way into decade by, I think, developing the science of managing ocean ecosystems, including fisheries, including aquaculture, on the basis of the most developed observing system in the whole ocean, in this part of the world, and embark also on the polar seas. So I think this is also a very good investment in terms of bringing young people on board. So I think you have a bright future, and the role of ocean science will be more important with time, and more important than now, and more influential. So I think you can do that.
Very good. So a strong message for continue our scientific efforts, absolutely, and the relevance of that. So if you go around, Manuel, what?
So my message would be, you know, we've tried to wrap it back to the beginning, the issues of sustainability. And I think sustainability is a word that is overused and no one really understands what it means. You said that, Katherine. But actually, it's becoming more complicated now, because to me, and I focus on fisheries because that's my life, fisheries sustainability is a space that has been vacated. It's been vacated because there are no funding agencies, no private foundations, no politicians that gain votes by talking about fisheries sustainability. They gain votes by talking about conservation. Now, my view is, what is this stupid view that what matters is to have 10% of the world, of the ocean protected, or 20%? What about the other 90% or 80%? What is wrong with saying our goal is to have 100% management for sustainability rather than 10% of protection? Why is that? Because that space of sustainability has been vacated in people's minds and in people's pockets. And it is very tough for the fisheries communities, for example, because they are demonized, they are not part of the solution, and the world has problems, not villains. They are now they have become villains. What is this? You know, when is it that we can actually turn this around? And ICES is a very good place to do that, because they've been working with fisheries communities and with fisheries industries for a very long time. We need to help the world by turning that sustainability omelette back to the other side and say, look, you know, we want to have 100% ocean sustainability, If we only focus on conservation, the ocean will not be part of the solution. And if we want the oceans to be part of the solution, that's what we need to do. And then start changing that narrative and bring science on board that narrative rather than use the science to throw stones on the sustainability roof.
Wonderful. 100% sustainability, not 10. That sounds good. Katherine.
Yeah, and I think, following up on Manuel, I have 2 points. One, I think we all have to, I think sustainability, as I say, is a process, and in that process you have to work to maximize the human welfare, in the case of fishing, nutrition or nutritional needs, while at the same time minimizing the environmental effects. And had the Green Revolution had that as a goal, we would not be eating as we are today. And fortunately, the World Bank, when it invests in aquaculture projects now, does ask that question. And I think we do need, as scientists, to look at our work and how it fits in there. But my real message to young people, or anyone else in this business, is that we're not good enough at communicating the magic that is life on Earth and life in the ocean. Life is what makes this planet unique. Every planet has a climate, every planet has elements and building blocks, Lego blocks if you will. But on the other planets, they're all relatively inert. They don't really react with anything. They say Neil Armstrong's footprint still can be seen on the moon. For very good reasons, I don't know if that's true or not. But I do know that it wouldn't be true on this planet because we have life. And life started in the ocean. So it's the interaction between life and climate that makes this Earth what it is. And I make this point, even though it seems obvious, because we've had an issue this year in my country, Denmark, where we have a lot of pigs. We have like about 5 or 6 times as many pigs as we have people, and they need protein. And people are getting a little unhappy about using fish meal, so we've got a great solution in Denmark, and we feed them starfish. Now, this has been through all of the fisheries people, and I'm sure it's a safe level in terms of the starfish population, that fishing. But what really upsets me with it is, and I'm translating from the Danish in my head, the headlines that I can find in the newspapers there. From pest to profit, the plague of the ocean bottom turned to pig feed. The plague of the fishermen becomes an important... Now, there was nobody from the fisheries community, the marine science community, or the NGOs that spoke for that poor starfish. But I have to say, I do not believe starfish were put on this planet to be a plague to the Danish fishermen.
Thank you. That was strong. Elisa, a final word from your end on the research agenda, perhaps?
Yeah, well, just thinking about how marine sciences can contribute to the SDGs, I think maybe by 2 things. One is which sciences are we talking about, and whether there is maybe room for broadening our understanding of sciences beyond natural sciences to the other sciences, and how we can work together to address maybe the barriers to influence in decision making that many people in this room may have already identified, but have not necessarily been able to overcome just on the basis of their own science. And then on the back of that, what is cooperation, and how we can work, how we can support fair and effective scientific cooperation, and what that takes within your discipline, across, with colleagues from different countries and at different stages of career. And really thinking about what are the things that will really trigger that into not being a one-off collaboration, but a long-standing partnerships, and how we can all benefit from that.
Thank you so much. And Claudia, you are in the business of, Cleo, you are in the business of education and research training. Do you have any recommendation?
Well,
final word to our colleagues.
Yeah, the final word I would make relates to the ongoing PBNJ discussions and the role of ICES in that process. Because I think, again, the relationship there is quite critical. We're talking about the beyond national jurisdiction, so all of the other areas, high seas and beyond, whatever that may mean. To date, there are only 14 countries, around 14 countries, who are engaged in, or who are the ones that are ready and available to do that exploitation of all of those areas beyond national jurisdiction. And my question is, what has ICES come? Because at least you're the only scientific body that would be able to give advice on, and I hope has given advice on, what that means for conservation, what that means for sustainability of life below water going forward. And so I haven't been able, I just came out myself out of that BBNJ process. It doesn't look like it can reach this point of adoption next year, in my view. But what was of great concern to me is the fact that there are only, let's say, 14, if probably 16 would be going too high, countries that have the technology, the knowledge to do this exploration and exploitation of the sea, and the impact that has, of course, for sustainability of our ocean going forward. The rest of the world, particularly the developing countries, man, they are way out there. They're just not. You see, the group of 77 has come together, but in terms of their impact, in terms of their capacity, of course, this is way beyond. And so my concern really is, for this decade of ocean science in which we are, and in the framework of which these negotiations are taking place, it's institutions like ICES that can actually give and sound the bell in terms of what is possible and what's not. I have not been able to follow so much what ICES's contribution has been in this regard, but I am concerned for the 99% of the world. As hopefully this treaty is expected to go into the second stage. Everybody doesn't think it will reach there next year, but clearly if it's not next year, it's the year after. I am concerned, greatly concerned, that the gap will be even greater as far as the developing world is concerned. So putting my development hat, this is what I could say.
Wonderful. Well, colleagues, the ambition here was to outline, make our research agenda perhaps even more complex than what we thought it was. And if I just summarize from my point of view as now in the position of in a management agency, I feel very strongly that what we have talked about here is the importance of putting our deep research into a broad perspective will be very, very critical. And for us to be able to communicate the health, the importance of the health of the oceans to society as a whole will be very, very critical. And we are struggling, and I'm an example of a management agency. We are struggling with the fact that there is this disconnect, some also distrust in what we do. And I think, as we heard, we need to strengthen the way we design our research, the way we interact with different stakeholders, so that there's a stronger dialogue, that the questions that are asked are also relevant. So I'm also very, very, very happy that we can see such a strong voice for the oceans here from you all and from this community. And my sense is that what we are doing here as a community is more and more important. And we hope that the SDG 14 will not be left behind because of us, that we will really take this step up and tell the story, the research that we do, and also finally that we as perhaps customers, this is a strange word in this business, but customers of advice, we need also to ask the broader and better questions moving forward. So thank you, the panel, for your great contribution, and to all colleagues here for standing with us in making the whole world much more complex than perhaps we thought it was. Thank you so much. There's also a gift to all of you.
Thank you. Wow, how am I going to put this hat on?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Great.
Thanks very much, Fleur. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you.
Thanks. You ready to go and see?